Charlotta is a fast-paced character when it comes to her attack style in Granblue Fantasy Relink. Combined with her fluid movement and unrelenting flurry of attacks, she's a great damage dealer to have on your team. In this Charlotta build and character guide, we'll be going over how to utilize her to the best of her ability. Charlotta worked tirelessly to become the captain of the Holy Knights and remains dedicated to her position, training day in and day out to grow stronger. Being able to wield a large sword at high speed, she can deal a huge amount of damage to targets with her attack flurries and heavy, impactful strikes, and yet maintains her swift movement speed in combat. Charlotta's gameplay revolves around her hard-hitting attacks and fluid movement speed. Players can pull off high-damage attack flurries and prolong them to deal even more damage. Most of her attack animations have short wind-up times, making her a beginner-friendly character in Granblue Fantasy Relink. The majority of Charlotta's skill repertoire is straightforward and can easily be used in combat. Skills such as a lunge attack that can also inflict defense down in the process, or a series of ranged attacks which can later turn into attack combinations. Being mobile is one of her assets, which gives her the ability to position herself in combat easily. Noble Stance is Charlotta's special support skill, which allows her blade to glow and deals more damage by prolonging combos, doing link attacks, and activating skills. Enforcer of Justice gives Charlotta the ability to block incoming attacks by perfectly timing her special attack without being interrupted. This is useful when trying to squeeze in her prolonged combo as much as you can and finishing it with her special attack without getting hit. Now that we got her special abilities out of the way, let's talk about Charlotta's skills. I'll be going through each of them and providing my recommendations, as well as giving you an idea of how these skills are being utilized. Just like any other DPS character, Charlotta does have access to a lunge skill, which is Shining Onslaught. Not only does it help the user position better in combat, but this skill also inflicts defense down in the process. Sword of Lumiel is a flurry of slashes that can be prolonged to deal continuous damage. It is very fun to use, and you'll be seeing high damage numbers while prolonging this skill. Players will have the freedom to cut the animation any time, just in case they need to adjust to a certain fight mechanic. Holy Ladder is Charlotta's range skill, which unleashes a series of shockwaves that can be connected to normal or a special attack. I use this skill regardless of the boss's position, since I can quickly deal decent damage and transition to normal attack rotations after using it. Valiant Stance is pretty interesting, since it will allow Charlotta to grow stronger over time if she is not hit. This attack buff is huge, since it can reach as high as 120%. As you adjust to Charlotta's gameplay, avoiding enemy attacks will not be an issue due to her fluid attacks and mobility. Use this skill if you're not hitting the damage ceiling cap. The next skill on the list is Koenig's Child, which grants Charlotta and her allies with 50% damage mitigation. While this skill is helpful in most cases, I tend to build Charlotta as a pure damage dealer, making this skill lower on my priority list. Rising Cut, on the other hand, is a straight parry and counter skill for Charlotta. It can be a lifesaver, especially when dealing with wide incoming AoE attacks. Sacred Charge is Charlotta's SBA gauge distributor. Charlotta will always be performing attack combinations or flurries, thus I find her SBA gauge fills in consistently fast. This skill will help you distribute your gauge to your party. Invincible grants Charlotta with invincibility for a short duration. Although I don't use this skill, I see it as a perfect skill for beginners as it can stack with Valiant Stance. The longer you're not getting hit, the stronger you become. Now that we've covered all of Charlotta's skills, here are my skill recommendations. I prefer building her as a pure damager, thus slotting in Shining Onslaught is a must. This skill will help you position in combat while also dealing defense down in the process. Follow up with Sword of Lumiel, which will be your main damage skill. Prolonging this skill will let Charlotta deal more damage. When handling more mobile types of bosses, I suggest ending Sword of Lumiel's animation strategically to take advantage of its strong finisher. For the third skill, Holy Ladder will take the spot. This skill is convenient to use as those slashes deal decent damage, and it will allow the user to transition to a normal attack combination. For the last skill in this setup, Valiant Stance is non-negotiable if you're not hitting the damage cap. The 120% attack buff it provides is huge, and getting adept at her gameplay is not that hard. However, if you are a beginner, you can replace Holy Ladder with Invincible to take advantage of its damage nullification buff. If you're hitting the damage cap ceiling, I suggest changing Valiant Stance to Rising Cut so you'll have the ability to parry and counter in combat. This is, of course, if you cannot slot any more damage cap sigils. Now that skills are out of the way, let's tackle the suggested build for Charlotta in Granblue Fantasy Relink. Since her gameplay allows her to deal a flurry of attacks that are easy to maintain, my main recommendation is to build her around damage cap, critical chance, and critical damage to take advantage of her high DPS in combat. Starting with Charlotta's weapon first, since we will be building her around the offensive side of things, I chose her Ascension weapon. It will add more attack power and HP trait to her build. In terms of a decent critical hit chance, we will be equipping her with critical hit rate sigils later on, so don't worry about that. This weapon alone adds a level 25 attack power trait, so it will give you the foundation to reach a higher level of attack power later on if you wish to do so. When it comes to Sigils, we'll be prioritizing offensive traits to fully utilize Charlotta's damage potential while also adding some other traits that I think will work best with this build. If your Sigil slots are limited at the moment, prioritize damage cap. Note that the tiers of the suggested Sigils in this setup are not mandatory, but the ideal ones. Equipping the right Sigils is far more important, so just equip yourself with what you have, especially in the early parts of the game or when you've just reached the end game. When playing on Proud difficulty, enemies can take you down in 1 or 2 hits, so increasing your HP with health or Aegis Sigils will give your build more survivability. Depending on your skill level or how well you know a certain fight, you can remove these and equip more offensive Sigil types so that you can enjoy higher damage like damage cap, for example. However, I suggest aiming for at least level 15 for the HP trait and levels 11 to 13 for the Aegis trait to gain a substantial boost to survivability. Damage cap Sigils play a pivotal role in increasing your overall damage when reaching endgame. This trait increases your damage ceiling, so pay attention if you're not getting higher damage numbers despite increasing your attack stat or adding other damage multipliers. If you notice that your damage is not increasing after equipping more damage-related Sigils, this is the time that you need to add damage cap trait to gain more damage. You can easily increase your damage by cranking up your damage cap. In this specific setup, I managed to level it up to level 53 to gain 185% increase to my damage cap. Of course, the higher the value, the better the results you can get. Assess your inventory and adjust later on. You'll be freeing Sigil slots later on as you level your current one to max, so it will give you headroom to slot in more damage cap Sigils. Critical chance Sigils are expected for this Charlotta build in Granblue Fantasy Relink. Since we'll be focusing more on the damage cap trait, our main goal is to have at least 80% critical hit chance. A level 22 critical hit rate trait will give you 26% critical hit chance, and that is enough to reach the ideal percentage. Playing with applicable right stones can also help you achieve this high level trait, so keep this in mind. Assess what you have and use them accordingly. For instance, I do have a right stone that adds more critical hit rate and other bonus traits, which will give you a decent bump into achieving our goals for this build. Since we've increased our critical hit chance trait, it's ideal to slot in critical damage sigils for more damage multipliers. Preferably, this trait should be nearing the max level, which is 30, to have that 50% damage multiplier. However, this skill can easily be changed to damage cap if you're hitting the damage cap threshold. In this build, I aimed for at least 18 critical damage trait to have that 38% damage increase. Combo booster sigils will work perfectly for this build as well. What it does is it gradually boosts the user's damage of each successive hit to enemies. The majority of Charlotta's attacks are easy to maintain, so Combo Booster will work well for this build. Combo Booster's ideal trait should be level 20 and above to have the minimum 80% boost to damage dealt, but you can keep your damage cap in check. The Tyranny trait can provide a significant boost to your attack power in exchange for lowering your total amount of HP. This is only suggested for seasoned players since they will not rely too much on their total health pool in exchange for dealing more damage. If you're up for it, you can remove any HP boosting on this build to slot more Tyranny sigils. However, ensure that you are not hitting the damage cap, or else you'll be losing HP for no reason. Although we do have a decent foundation for attack power, this is merely a bonus if you freed some of the slots when you upgraded all the required sigils. Charlotta's exclusive sigil will provide a 0.5% skill cooldown reduction per hit when Noble Stance is active. If you have access to the Holy Knight's Luster sigil, definitely slot it and you'll have access to your skills faster. Now that we've tackled the build for Charlotta, let's move on to her actual usage. The majority of her DPS comes from her normal attack and skill combinations. As I have mentioned earlier, Charlotta is a beginner-friendly character. Despite being convenient to use, players can also enjoy a constant string of unrelenting combos which deal tons of damage while worrying mostly about cooldowns. Her skills are all straightforward and can be used in combat, so depending on the situation, react accordingly. When the battle starts, use Valiant Stance to take advantage of the attack buff it provides and try your utmost not to get hit to enjoy more attack damage. If you change this to Rising Cut, use her parry skill to skip fight mechanics you can't be bothered to avoid. Shining Onslaught is perfect when gap closing between you and your enemies to inflict defense down. Unleashing normal attack combinations and combo finishers is the suggested route here. Use your Sword of Lumiel and prolong its animation as long as you can for more damage. I always use Holy Ladder whenever I have the opportunity since it does transition back to normal attacks afterwards. In terms of party composition, Charlotta can fill in the main DPS role. You can bring another DPS as a stunner if you wish so you can enjoy more Link attacks. Pair them with 2 supporting characters or slot in a hybrid character and you're all set. For a party composition example, a Charlotta is set as the main damage dealer of the group. The secondary DPS is Lancelot, who can freeze enemies. When the target is frozen, there is a higher chance that Charlotta can prolong her flurry of attacks. Cagliostro can fill in the main support role this time with her all-around buffs, which are Phantasmagoria and Burst Heals. She can also do the revives when needed and can inflict attack down debuff on targets. The last person would be Percival, who can be a DPS support role. He can buff the entire team with attack and defense up, and since it's a unique type of buff, it stacks with Cagliostro's Phantasmagoria. This is just one example of a party composition that can work with Charlotta. She is very fun and easy to play, and it's no wonder beginners are finding this character easy to love. I hope you learned a little bit about Charlotta and how to use her. If you have more questions, you can check out our Granblue Fantasy Relink wiki or leave a comment in the comment section, and I will try and answer them. And as always, if you have other tips for players that I forgot to mention, please leave them in the comments as well.